are watching Simon Says on Mtgo Academy featuring Simon Götzen.
Hello and welcome everyone, Simon Götzen here, recording Simon Says for mtgoacademy.com. And as always, I have a quick intro for you. The topic today is Vintage Masters. I think that's turned out to be an incredible set. I love drafting it, and I'm gonna do a little exercise today, which is looking at the commons that I've drafted. And I didn't want to spoil the results for myself either, so I don't actually know what my most drafted commons are as of yet. What I do know though is that I have drafted 1,019 cards of Vintage Masters, and I also traded a little bit. So my estimate is, let's see if I can get that up here. My estimate would be 1,019 cards divided by 45 is 22.64 drafts. So my estimate is that I've done 23 or maybe 24 drafts of this format as of now. So yeah, I would say quite a lot of drafting. And I have to say that I like a whole lot of different archetypes, some less than others, but I've been quite successful with varied strategies, from mono-red goblins to crazy control or storm decks. So this exercise works as follows. You go to only the commons, and then you look at which cards you own the most of. So looking at these white cards here, I see a 13, I see a 15. So let's just see what happens if I type in owned larger than 15. All right, I see 2 of them already. And well, that's my top 5 already. Interesting. Chartreuse Cougar, a creature with mountain cycling, and then the 3 cycling lands in red, blue, and white. Red and white happens to be the colors that Lightning Rift and Astral Slide is in. And Lonely Sandbar is in blue. Well, you want to have it in Storm, but you can also pair it with red or white, or just build a 3-color cycling deck. So this just shows that I value cycling lands higher than others. And it shows that I like to draft Rift slide decks, which I think, if you get them, are among the most powerful in the format. And they heavily rely on key uncommons, which is kind of a trend in this format. Just like Goblins, for example, wants its Ringleaders and its Rites of Initiation at the uncommon slot. Well, the cycling deck wants Lightning Rift and Astral Slide from the uncommon slot. And there's countless other examples as well. So Chartreuse Cougar is the first land cycler in this list, and I'm not surprised by that at all. I like to play it in my not super aggressive red decks, and it's also great in the cycling decks. Last but not least, Goblin Commando. I think the card is just a little bit underrated. Everybody loves Flametongue Kavu, but this is a goblin that gets searched out by Goblin Matron. You flip it off of Ringleader. The cost gets reduced if you have a Goblin War Chief, and you can do all the nice tricks that you can do with Flametongue Kavu. Now, I'm not saying it is Flametongue Kavu, but it has a lot of advantages that make it a lot better than just a 5 mana 2/2 that shocks a creature when it comes into play. So yeah, I think Goblin Commando is just a little bit underrated. I often have 2, 3, sometimes even 4 in my deck, and I'm almost never unhappy to draw them. All right, let's see what else I have. So this was the larger than 15 camp, which means that I can now look at equal to 15. Another cycling land, no surprises there. And Banalish Trapper, I think just a very, very good creature. And even in the aggressive white decks, I'm never unhappy to have a Trapper. You can even splash it because the mana cost isn't too prohibitive. Let's see if we can find cards from another color. Yeah, there's Nightscape Familiar. Nightscape Familiar is one of the key cards to drafting black in my experience. And of course, mostly I'm talking about blue-black Storm, because Nightscape Familiar is kind of a key component. Often your blue-black Storm decks will only have Nightscape Familiars and Rituals, maybe a Tendrils, as black spells. So in fact, you're going to end up with a lot of islands, which is great if you want to play High Tide, and only very little black spells. But Nightscape Familiar is one of the key cards in Storm. It's also amazing in Control. the fact that you can regenerate and that your card advantage spells cost less is huge. So Nightscape Familiar, for example, once I turn 3'd Cloud of Fairies, generating a mana, and then with the 4 mana that I had available, I played a Goblin Commando on turn 3, killing my opponent's 2-drop or whatever. Nightscape Familiar is really, really good and still a bit underrated, I think. Alright, Scourge Familiar, this is the first junky card, not really a good card at all, and even in the Storm decks you don't really go off with the Familiar as often. What you can do is bounce your own lands with Temporal Fissure or bounce other permanents with Temporal Fissure the turn you're going off, and then it'll generate a bit of extra mana. So it's not completely unplayable, I just don't really like it. So this is the first card on this list that I'm not a big fan of. Phantom Nomad, on the other hand, I think is really, really good. It's the white aggressive creature that I also want in my control decks or in my token decks. It flashbacks Battle Screech, which is huge. It blocks twice against larger creatures. It's really good at double blocking. You can even attack into Simian Gruns sometimes, into represented Simian Gruns. There's just a lot of things going on with Phantom Nomads that make them pretty sweet. Also, if you put an enchantment on them, then they are pretty much unkillable because they won't take any more damage. And that brings me to white-green Auras, which is definitely an archetype as well. Not one that I draft too often, but if you can get the provoke creatures, the elephant guides, the wild mongrels, some battle creatures, you can build some very good decks. Crows and Vereen, one of the key cards of that archetype. I think I'm going to go down to 12 and then we'll have seen enough. Kovikan Sorcerer is very good in Madness and even better in Storm. I think another card that's a bit underrated. It doesn't look super powerful, just like Goblin Commando doesn't, but once it gets going, it really makes a difference in power level compared to what your opponent is doing. If you combine it with Obsessive Searches, then things just get really unfair. Or, of course, any of the Green Madness cards. And a Sudden Strength. That's also not really a card that I'm a big fan of. It's a typical card that I like to pick up late so that my opponents won't play it against me. It has its merits, maybe in the Crows and Varine decks as well, but yeah, not a big fan of that. Now we see that I am a fan of goblins. I would have thought that I had more goblin matrons, but these are just really, really good. Wall of Diffusion is also quite underrated. In your defensive decks, you're super happy about a 5 toughness creature, of which there aren't many in the format. Spark Spray works well in the cycling decks, but you can also put it into goblins, play one in the main, or just have some in the sideboard for certain matchups. Fledgling Djinn, not my kind of card. I think the damage really a problem, but if you're black aggressive, it's definitely the way to go. Just not really my type of strategy. And one more Land Cycler, the white one this time, and then Terror Faithful. My preference for control decks is showing here, and the Faithful, of course, insane with Astral Slide as well. Alright, let's go down one more slot. This is Deathblade Elite. I talked about the Provoke Aura deck, and Deathblade Elite together with any of the white auras or the green auras can make for pretty unfair games if you just start picking up your opponent's creatures. And let's see what the last one is. Rescind, another cycling card. So I think my preferences are pretty clear here. As I've said, I really like drafting this format. I think it's one of the best limited experience in a very long time. It is a bit costly, so make sure that you know what you're heading into. Make sure that you know which cards are valuable and which aren't. And then have fun drafting Vintage Masters. I prepared a draft for you guys, and I wish you best of luck drafting. Have fun with my videos, and see you next time. Bye bye.